Mr. Yelenchili, you have the floor. Or Mr. Bolden.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Yes.
We tested this earlier. My screen show.
I don't know. Is that what you're looking for? Very good. You may proceed, sir.
Honor. Just going to start my stopwatch. Who killed Tara Baker? Obviously, by now, ladies and gentlemen, you know that's what this case is about. But before we get to know who killed Tara, it's important to know a little bit more about her. Tara Louise Baker was a bright, young, 23-year-old from Lovejoy, Georgia. And when she woke up on the morning of January the 19th, 2001, she had her whole life in front of her. She was a first-year law student here at the University of Georgia, and she had a wonderful circle of family and friends. Ladies and gentlemen, the next day, Saturday, January the 20th, it actually would have been her 24th birthday. And in the early morning hours of January the 19th, 2001, Tara's promising future came to a violent and abrupt end. She was sexually assaulted. She was stabbed. She was strangled. And she was left for dead on her bedroom floor. Her bed was set on fire. A fire, ladies and gentlemen, that smoldered for a considerable amount of time before it finally erupted through the roof of the house that she shared with two friends at 160 Fawn Drive here in Athens, Clarke County. Morning, Tara's life ended. And what started was a 2.5-decade-long saga that has hung over the Baker family and hung over this entire Athens community like a specter. Ladies and gentlemen, this trial represents the final chapter in that tragic saga. The chapter where the state will prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant, Edrick Faust, is guilty of extinguishing the bright light that was Tara Louise Baker 25 years ago, where the state will show that he is guilty as charged of the crimes in this indictment. So you've heard the indictment a few times by now. Judge Lott read it in its entirety at the beginning of jury selection. The judge also just went briefly over what the charges are again here this morning. I'm not going to spend too much time going through the indictment itself right now. There will be a time and a place for that at the end of the trial. But again, ladies and gentlemen, you know now that the defendant, Mr. Faust, is charged with 12 counts. Count 1, malice murder. Counts 2 through 5, felony murder. Count 6, burglary. Count 7, aggravated sodomy. Count 8, rape. Count 9, aggravated assault. Count 10, aggravated sodomy, count 11, arson in the first degree, and count 12, possession of a knife during the commission of a felony. All those charges stem from the morning of January the 19th, 2001. And I expect that that's going to become clear over the course of this trial. Ladies and gentlemen, these are obviously heinous crimes. And in order to prove them, and to prove that the defendant is the person who committed them, the state is going to have to present some very grisly evidence. And that's going to come in the form of both testimony and photos. Ladies and gentlemen, some of this trial is going to be difficult. But it's unfortunate, but it's necessary. I just wanted to give you a heads up. On January the 19th of 2001 at 11:22 a.m., Athens 911 started receiving telephone calls in the area of Deer Park regarding a fire at 160 Fawn Drive. Now, if you're not familiar with Deer Park, just to give you a little bit of reference, if we head, make sure I've got my orientation right, down Lexington Road, away from downtown, heading out towards Oglethorpe County. When you get past, Gaines School, Tuxton United Methodist Church is there on the left, right off Lexington. And the road immediately past Tuxton United Methodist Church, before you get to the Walmart, is Cooper Road. So again, heading that direction from downtown, left on Cooper Road, past the church. And then actually Deer Park, which is where Fawn Drive is located, is just on the right. And so when they get this call at 11:22 in the morning, the fire department is immediately en route. The firefighters actually kick in the door, the front door to Tara's house because it was locked. And when they did so, they encountered smoke in the main living room area of the house. And I'm going to, in just a few minutes, not yet, going to be able to show you what the inside of that house looked like. So these firefighters kick in the door, and the first thing that they notice, apart from the smoke, is back in the right corner, which is where the kitchen is located. Through the smoke, they can actually see the eyes of the stove. It's one of those old school stoves that has the circular heating element. They can see those glowing red. And so through the smoke, they go over there to the stove. They realize that the knobs that would turn on and off those eyes have actually been removed from the stove itself. And so the firefighters put those knobs back on and turn the stove off. They open the back door to the house to ventilate, to help start getting the smoke out of the room. To this point, I don't think they've completely ascertained exactly where the fire was coming from. The back left bedroom of the house, and there's actually a bathroom door right next to it, it'll make sense in a few minutes, are closed. And so they go over there and they kick those doors in as well. And when they kick open that bedroom door, they are immediately met with flames rushing out over their heads. Firefighters enter and extinguish that fire. And in that moment, ladies and gentlemen, they discover Tara. She's naked. She's in between the mattress and the footboard to her bed. The footboard had been ripped away from the bed frame itself. So she's in that little V-shaped space in between. They notice a computer cord, what appears to be a computer cord, is wrapped around her neck. And so realizing what they've seen, the firefighters back out and turn the scene over to the police. And law enforcement does arrive. And
Okay, I paused it in this room. We do have a verdict. If you were watching the all par case, we do have a verdict reached. They finally have came back. The jury, that is. So we have a verdict. So if you want to go over to that room, you're more than welcome to watch the verdict. They must have heard us. They must have heard us. They haven't started showing it yet, but I do have it on the screen, and a verdict has been reached. So here we go with that one. Yes, I'll keep this one on pause for us. No problem. Since we were right in the middle of opening statements on, oh, that's the Georgia trial. Sorry, y'all. He said, Tara, I found you guilty. Oh, hey, Tara, how you doing?
So what we have here, ladies and gentlemen, is a sketch made by Athens Clarke County Police as to the interior of 160 Fallen Drive. I won't spend but a couple minutes going over it. The front door here is at the bottom with the arrow pointing up. Again, you see the kitchen in the back right with the stove. which is what the firefighters reported seeing glowing red when they came in the door. And what I want to focus on is what's in the top left of that diagram, what is referred to as bedroom 3. That was Tara's room. And you can see bedroom 3 has a bathroom connected to it, and then there's a door leading both from the bathroom, a door leading to the living room, and one leading into Tara's room. So that's the basic layout of 160 Fawn Drive. You can see there's a back door, which again has the arrow pointing down. And right next to that is a window that is situated right above their dining room table. You're going to see photos that will also help kind of explain the layout of 160 Fawn Drive. So that's the house as a whole. And this is Tara's room as the police encounter it. And again, I've tried to explain, but I think this does a better job showing exactly the orientation of her body inside that bedroom in the back left of 160 Fawn Drive. So again, you can see the footboard having been ripped away from the frame and her body lying in between. So upon arrival, Athens-Clarke County Police starts processing the scene. I expect you're going to hear from a number of witnesses that Tara's body, despite having obviously been in a room that was consumed by fire, her hair was actually still intact. I expect you're going to hear that several witnesses actually recall the smell of shampoo still coming from her hair. Again, there was a printer cord wrapped around her neck. I believe the printer itself was there in the room. And there's one thing that the police noticed that firefighters hadn't, was that Tara actually had a stab wound to the right side of her neck. And I think it was on the diagram, the knife was right underneath her body with blood on it. Officers also noticed a clock on the wall in Tara's room. That clock had stopped at 9:32. In processing the scene, officers noted that it appeared as if the doors and windows had been wiped clean. There's a screen to the back, that back window, the one that's right next to the back door, that showed signs of having been tampered with. And I expect there's probably going to be some confusion about exactly where that screen was when the firefighters arrived and when law enforcement arrived, but we'll get to that. Ladies and gentlemen, at 160 Fawn Drive, I submit that the evidence is going to show that any physical evidence that could have conceivably been helpful was collected. As an example, I think you're going to hear they even took the drain assembly out of her bathtub. A little bit more about the fire. I expect you're going to hear evidence that the bed, Tara's bed, was the source of that fire. And a little bit more, actually, I expect you're going to hear that there was a blanket that had been in the living room on the back of a recliner. That blanket had been removed from the recliner, taken over to the stove, set on fire, and then thrown on Tara's bed. I expect you're going to hear that there's actually still some remnants of that blanket on the stove itself. In learning about the processing of the scene, I expect you're also going to hear that there were no fingerprints of any evidentiary value that were taken in the house or off of Tara's body. I expect you're going to hear that hairs were collected from her body and from her room. And I also expect you're going to hear that her laptop was missing. The next thing I want to talk a little bit about, ladies and gentlemen, is the canvas of the neighborhood. By canvas, I mean police getting out and knocking on doors and seeing what, if anything, people had seen that morning. That was obviously done in this case to a significant degree. I expect you'll hear one witness recalled seeing a white male running in the area, open area behind Tara's house and near Tara's house around 7:45 that morning. I expect you're going to hear multiple witnesses talk about describing a black male with an orange shirt or sweatshirt at various places in Deer Park around 8 o'clock to 8:15 that morning. I expect you're going to hear one witness who described smelling a faint odor of smoke as he was leaving for work around 8:40, 8:45 that morning. At the time, ladies and gentlemen, there's just not much to go on as it related to that canvas. The next thing I'd like to talk about is the autopsy. Tara's body was taken over to Atlanta to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation's Department of Forensic Sciences the next day, Saturday the 20th, her birthday. And an autopsy was conducted by a medical examiner named Dr. Edrick Faust. And here's where the evidence I submit maybe get kind of difficult. There were photos that were taken at that autopsy. And you're going to see some of those photos when Dr. Faust testifies. It's going to be hard. You're going to see and hear about contusions surrounding Tara's vagina and anus. You're going to hear that stab wound that the officers noted when they got in to her bedroom had actually severed her jugular vein. You're going to hear about the ligature mark that was encircling her neck, and that her hyoid bone, which is a bone in your neck, had been broken. You'll hear about a subarachnoid hemorrhage to her head, which is indicative of blunt force trauma. You're going to hear about defensive wounds, defensive type wounds to her hands. Dr. Faust, after conducting the autopsy of Tara Baker, listed her cause of death as ligature strangulation and a stab wound, with another significant condition being blunt force trauma to the head. He ruled the manner of death, obviously, a homicide. As part of the autopsy, a sexual assault kit was taken based on the way Tara's body was found, based on Dr. Faust's observations. So a sexual assault kit involved oral, vaginal, and rectal swabs of Tara and smears that were created based on those swabs. And I expect over the course of this trial, there's going to be a great deal made about how one of those swabs was mislabeled. I expect the state's going to be able to clear that up as this trial unfolds. As part of the autopsy, head hair and pubic hair was retained, and fingernail and toenail clippings were taken. The next thing of significance that I'd like to talk about is some of the early forensics that were done in connection with this case. You're going to hear from Jennifer Corsi. At the time, back in 2001, Ms. Corsi was a forensic biologist at the GBI Crime Lab. She actually now works at the U.S. Army's Criminal Investigation Laboratory. She made a career out of this type of work. Ms. Corsi is the one who actually did chemical testing on that sexual assault kit, the one that we just talked about. You'll hear that her testing failed to reveal the presence of any seminal fluid, and that she took microscopic examinations of the vaginal smears and observed no spermatozoa or partially intact spermatozoa And so, ladies and gentlemen, based on the existing technology and the existing protocols in existence back in 2001, there was nothing further that could be done with that sexual assault kit. I expect you'll hear that Ms. Corsi, then Fincher, so if I use both names, please forgive me, did confirm that the blood on Tara's fingernails, the only DNA in that on those fingernails belonged to Tara, that there was blood on the knife, and the DNA from that blood also only belonged to Tara. And there was no blood on the toenails that were taken. Not necessarily Ms. Corsi, but other forensics going on in the early days of the investigation. There were attempts to obtain fingerprints of any sort of evidentiary value, nothing to go on. I mentioned the hairs. Submit to you, there was nothing that would help in the investigation at that time. I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit more about Tara. In January of 2001, again, she's living at 160 Fawn Drive. She had two roommates, Ashley Peavy, now Ashley Hall, Valerie Lowe, now Valerie Lang. And I say that because, again, I might refer to them as both. Just wanted to get out in front and explain why that might be the case. So the three of them, Tara, Ashley, and Valerie, had moved into 160 Fawn Drive in August of 2000. All three of them were in grad school at UGA, but pursuing different programs. You know, Tara obviously was studying law. I expect you're going to hear evidence about Tara's morning routine. If she had a 9:30 class, which I expect you're going to hear she did that Friday, property law class on the 19th, then she was a pretty early riser. Up around 6:30 in the morning. First thing she'd do is take a shower. Expect you'll hear she'd come out and eat her breakfast. Every morning, same thing, cheese grits. And she'd come out and eat those cheese grits, her hair's still wet. And then she'd go back into her room and sit on the floor in front of her bed to blow dry her hair. And that took a while, ladies and gentlemen, because I expect you're going to hear Tara had a lot of hair. I expect you're also going to hear about how Tara was trying to buckle down in January of 2001. As that new semester at the law school had gotten underway, she was spending less time at home and more time at the law library. But Saturday was her birthday. And on Friday night, she was going to go out and have some fun with some friends. They were going to go to the Winery, which is a bar downtown on Broad Street. I don't know if it's still there, but it was in 2001. Talk about Tara's last hours. Go through what we know about Tara on Thursday, January the 18th. We know that both Ashley and Valerie were leaving for the weekend. They were both leaving that Thursday. Ashley left late that afternoon. She and Tara had been at home together before Ashley left. We know that from approximately 7:30 to approximately 9:30, Tara was at the law library here on North Campus, not too far from the Arch. She's there with a friend named Katie Lonstein. Around 9:30 that night, Katie leaves, goes home. I think there was a discussion about, hey, call me when you get there, make sure you get home safe. And Katie indicated that she would do that, but she forgot. Why is that significant? Because Tara called her. Tara called her at 9:46 that night to make sure Katie had gotten home. And ladies and gentlemen, that is the last time that anyone is known to have spoken to Tara. Friday, again, January the 19th. I think it was kind of a cold, overcast, rainy day, kind of day that it seems like we've been having a lot of those lately. Again, expect you're going to hear evidence that the neighbor across the street smelled smoke, around 8:45, 8:45 as he was going to work. Point out once again, Tara misses property class. It started at 9:30 that morning. The clock on the wall stopped at 9:32. And then again, ladies and gentlemen, 11:22 is when the fire is reported at 160 Fawn Drive. I'm going to talk a little bit now about Chris Melton. Some of you have heard his name already in jury selection. Chris Melton was Tara's boyfriend. You're going to hear a lot about the relationship between Tara and Chris leading up to January the 19th of 2001. What I expect that you're going to hear is this was a relatively typical relationship between two very busy people in their early 20s. Tara and Chris met when they both attended college at Georgia College in Milledgeville. It's now Georgia College and State University in the late 90s. Tara and Chris were introduced through mutual acquaintances and hit it off, and they began to date. When Tara graduated from Georgia College, she went back home to the Lovejoy area. And for those of you who don't know, Lovejoy is off of I-75 south of Atlanta. And she got a job at a law firm there. Chris didn't finish school. He also moved back home in with his parents as well. That's in Covington. When Chris moved home, his mom told him he had to get a job. And so he got one. Chris became a plumber. And so at this time, Tara and Chris are in a long distance relationship because Covington, Lovejoy, about an hour and a half apart, maybe a little bit less. Tara moved to Athens, I believe in 1999, when she got a job at a law firm here in town. So at that time, Tara's in Athens, Chris is still in Covington, and so they're still kind of doing the long distance thing, right? Maybe not quite as long, but certainly not in the same town. And they found it hard to find time to get together. And so Chris moved to Athens. He got an apartment with a roommate at a place off of Millage Avenue. And he was commuting back and forth to work. Most of his work was in the Loganville, Gwinnett County area. But I expect what you're going to hear is that Chris and Tara were trying to figure out how to have an adult relationship when they both had a work life and other things going on that they had to manage. As I mentioned before, Tara started law school in August of 2000. I expect you're going to hear that during that fall semester, that first semester, Ashley and Valerie are going to mention to you that Tara was spending a lot of time at Chris's apartment. Now, that doesn't mean Chris wouldn't come over to her house too. He did, maybe just not as often. But when they did, they'd spend the night at each other's house, both at Millage Avenue and at Fawn Drive. This is normal relationship stuff. Moving into the spring semester, January 2001. Now remember, Tara was trying to buckle down, more time in the library. Well, at that time, Chris also had good things going on. I mentioned that he had taken up plumbing. He was working for a company, but around this time, he started maybe thinking about going out and doing work on his own. You know, his business was mainly in the Loganville, Gwinnett area. And so at this time, you know, he's using his truck, not a company one. It's his gas, his time spent commuting. And if he's traveling back and forth from Athens to Loganville every day, he's not making money. And the reason why I point all that out, ladies and gentlemen, because I expect the evidence is going to show that at that time, Chris moved back in with his parents in Covington. So he could spend more time working and less time traveling to and from. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I expect that others might have thought that the relationship between Chris and Tara was starting to fizzle. Again, I think the evidence is going to show that this was just a relationship between two young people whose presence and whose futures were still being figured out. with some highs and some lows, but nothing out of the ordinary. In fact, I expect you're going to hear that Chris had gotten Tara a very sentimental Christmas present just a few weeks prior to her death, and it made her really happy. He was going to come to Athens Saturday to celebrate Tara's birthday with her. Chris saw the potential for a future between them. Others may have made assumptions otherwise. But the bottom line, ladies and gentlemen, is the evidence will show you that there is nothing to suggest their relationship was in a bad place. Let's talk about what Chris was doing on January the 19th of 2001. As I just got done explaining, he spent the night before, Thursday night into Friday, at his parents' house in Covington. And from 7:15 that morning until long after Tara's body is discovered, his whereabouts are accounted for. At 7:15 or thereabouts, a coworker named Josh McCurdy came over to Chris's house, or Chris's parents' house, to be clear. And Josh was with Chris all day. There's a brief period of time around lunch, 1:30 to 2:30-ish, where they were not together. 1:30, obviously, after the fire at Fawn Drive. But other than that, they were together all day. Made numerous stops throughout the day. You're going to hear a little bit about some of those stops. What I expect the evidence is going to show is that at 9:08 that morning, Chris went into a Wachovia in Loganville. Wachovia, for those of you who don't know, is now Wells Fargo.
Thanks so much, Film, for the gifted membership. Now, you know, if you receive that gifted membership, you make sure that you say thank you to Film for turning you green. Welcome to the crew, Haynes. It's 5, but I can tell y'all now, it's 5 and nothing has changed in the courtroom. Let me look at court TV because I know everybody's waiting on this verdict. Yeah, I hate how they do theirs sometimes. Yeah, you know, Sniffles probably late. Sniffles, they probably couldn't get him on the phone or something. Okay, here we got some noise in there. Okay, here we go. Verdict is in and it's being shown.
And at 9:12 that morning, he withdrew $480 from the teller. I expect you're going to hear about some visits that he made to a place called Truck Customs. Remember, Chris is starting, to do his own thing. He's got a truck. He's in the plumbing business. He needs a pipe rack. He needs a ladder rack. So he'd gone to this place called Truck Customs. First stop time, I think maybe around 10 o'clock. Second time later in the afternoon. And it's at that second trip to Truck Customs, ladies and gentlemen, where Chris gets a call from Tara's mother. Something's happened in Athens. You need to come over. Ladies and gentlemen, all those facts were established fairly early in the investigation. Now, you're going to hear about Chris's reaction when he got the call from Tara's mom about something happening in Athens, how Josh actually had to drive him in his own truck to Athens. And even with all of this, ladies and gentlemen, with those facts being established early in the investigation, Chris was always under the microscope as it related to Tara's murder. He was asked to give blood. He was asked to give a sample of his head hair. He was asked to give a sample of his pubic hair. Chris was subjected to repeated interviews by law enforcement. Every time anything's ever been asked of him, his answer's always been the same: whatever you need. The evidence will show that Chris has been fully cooperative for over 25 years. I'm going to try and move a little bit quicker now because I think I'm taking longer than I intended. But there is a lot of other investigation going on in this case, ladies and gentlemen. This is a 20-plus-year-old case. The state is not going to present to you everything that was done over the course of this 23-year investigation. From a period of time, several months after Tara's death in 2001 until 2024, we're going to talk more about that soon, there was a lot of work being done on this case. But there was nothing that would point the police in the direction of Tara's killer. There are tens of thousands of pages of police reports, records. There are hundreds of hours of interviews. It would take months to present all that in court, and we're not going to do it. And in so doing, we're not trying to hide anything. We're being mindful that it is an absolute impossibility to show you every lead that was chased down and every lead that became a dead end. About the dozens of persons of interest who are identified but ultimately ruled out. Hard work, frankly, just didn't result in any relevant evidence. One example, in 2010, the ligature, the printer cord, and the knife were retested for DNA, not just the blood, to see if there was any touch DNA on those items. And once again, only Tara's DNA was found. I expect over the course of this trial, you're going to hear about some missteps and some unanswered questions. Remember that window frame I talked about earlier? Well, the window frame was obviously taken into evidence back in 2001. But now, 25 years later, it's missing. And that's unfortunate. But what is fortunate is that you're still going to hear about the processing of that window frame that was done back in 2001 and how, again, there were no prints recovered. You'll hear that Tara's laptop, the one that I mentioned had been taken from her room, has never been found. And lastly, as far as unanswered questions go, I'd submit to you, the evidence can show that no one investigating this case has been able to quite figure out exactly how the defendant got in and out of 160 Fawn Drive. Was it the kitchen window with the frame that showed signs of tampering? Was it the back door? To this day, ladies and gentlemen, there's no definitive answer. And the state's not going to be able to show you the answer to that in this trial either. That fact is not necessary to prove the defendant's guilt. And so again, with all this investigation going on and no leads being developed, the case goes cold. Something happened that changed all of that in 2023. Something called the Coleman-Baker Act was signed into law by Governor Brian Kemp. In case you hadn't figured out, the Baker part of that act is named after Tara. This is a law designed to address cases exactly like this one, where all leads have been exhausted and no likely perpetrator has been identified. What the law does is it directs new eyes to be placed on the file. See if all appropriate forensic testing and analysis was done in the first instance, or if additional testing might produce evidence or information relevant to the investigation. And so at this point, enter into our story Agents Liz Bigham and Jeremy Howell with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. Agent Bigham, Agent Howell are longtime agents with the GBI, and they joined that cold case unit after the law was enacted. In December of 23, they started looking at this case. And one of the first things they did was a dogged re-examination of all the physical evidence in Tara's case, including the sexual assault kit that had been taken at her autopsy. That kit was resubmitted for testing in February of 2024. And so, ladies and gentlemen, a lot's changed about DNA and the way DNA is tested from back in 2001. I expect you're going to hear that the sensitivity of that testing has improved greatly. And so in February of 24, the crime lab was able to find first male DNA and then obtain a DNA profile from item 2I. It's going to get confusing. We can clear all this up later about the names of those items. 2I is labeled oral swab B. It's pretty confusing. And so upon further testing of 2I, what they do is they separate the DNA into what's called fractions. I'm not going to get too much into the details of it now, but the idea is you're trying to separate the female DNA from the male DNA. 2I, the oral swab B, the first fraction is a match to Tara Baker. In the second fraction, there's a partial major profile of male DNA. And that DNA is not Tara Baker and is not Chris Melton. In case I haven't been clear, when I refer to a profile, what I'm, for lack of a better term, talking about is a DNA fingerprint. So when I talk about profiles, that's what I mean. But that profile, that partial major profile from item 2I, was eligible to be submitted into something called CODIS, C-O-D-I-S. That stands for the Combined DNA Index System. CODIS is a national database of known DNA profiles. I think that as of November last year, there are about 26 million known profiles in CODIS. And once that profile from item 2I was uploaded into CODIS, the way it works is it is routinely compared against the 26 million known profiles to see if any leads could be developed. On April 30th, 2024, there was a hit. And it was that DNA, again, matched from item 2I, and that hit was to the defendant, Edrick Faust. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the first time in 23 years and tens of thousands of pages of this law enforcement file that Mr. Faust's name shows up. So what do we know about Mr. Faust? He lived at 350 Cooper Road. And we talked about Cooper Road earlier. You can see it there. It's actually at the top of this picture. The star represents 160 Fawn Drive. I'll get more into that in just a minute. Cooper Road, again, at the very top, going horizontally in the picture. If you were to go left on Cooper Road, that's where you're going to run into Lexington Road, just to give you some orientation. Mr. Faust is living at 350 Cooper Road. 350 Cooper Road, ladies and gentlemen, is literally 585 feet from 160 Fawn Drive. So, next, what happens? Agents Bigham and Howell obtain a warrant to get Mr. Faust's buccal swabs, cheek swabs. And the purpose of that is to get a known sample of his DNA. CODIS, only a lead, you got to confirm it. And again, the first fraction from oral swab B, Tara's profile, it's always Tara's profile, vaginal, oral A, oral B, we'll clear that up later. Always Tara's DNA in that first fraction. And in that second fraction, you're gonna hear about there being two profiles, but the major profile, the partial major profile from item 2I was a match to Edrick Faust. And that match, I might mess up the wording of it, was 1 in 800 quadrillion.
I have objection, Your Honor. And I have a motion.
Objection and a
All
motion.
right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to have you go back into the jury room. Don't discuss the case. Thank you.
Because he don't know how to pronounce it. Objection and mistrial. Because he don't know how to pronounce it. He just adding stuff in. Yep, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to start this all right. He said objection and I got a motion. Oh, please don't tell me they're gonna let us see it. I actually want to see this argument now. Let's see. I think they're gonna let us see it. Wait. No, maybe they're not.
As far as the match language, Your Honor. Past this, there are going to be more slides that use the same type of language. Obviously, when it occurs, I'm going to get up and move for a mistrial again to preserve the record. But I would ask the Honorable Court to instruct the state to use accurate evidence that will come into, accurate descriptions of evidence that would come into evidence. This slide is not accurate. And the next two slides that involves true allele won't be accurate as far as the match language, Your Honor.
Anything from the state before I make a comment?
I disagree with every assertion Mr. Cruz just
All right, thank you. Mr. Cruz, your comment is, you used the word evidence. And I've already instructed the jury that anything said by the attorneys, including opening and closings and arguments by the attorneys, are not to be considered as evidence. This is not to be considered as evidence. It is part of the opening statement. I'm going to deny your motion.
Yes, ma'am.
Have you heard from them? All right.
You know, I think that that's kind of like a twofold statement. Like, okay, so whatever the attorneys tell you is not considered evidence in the opening and closing statements. Man, how do you even separate that? Please explain to me, how does that work? I couldn't personally separate it. I probably think what the attorney said was more of evidence than anything else. And the judge mic is scratchy.
I don't think I
Good. Y'all hear that? How our microphone sound? Yay, Susie. We was playing hide and go seek with you.
All right, you all may be seated. Thank you. Mr. Bolden, you have the floor.
As I was saying, 1 in 800 quadrillion. That is, if I got it right, an 8 followed by 17 zeros. That's not all that you're going to hear about as it relates to DNA testing that was conducted in 2024. You're going to hear a great deal about something called true allele. I am not going to go into it too in depth this afternoon, but basically, true allele is this high-tech software that uses something called probabilistic genotyping to decode very small or mixed samples of DNA from a piece of evidence. And again, I'm not going to go into all the nuts and bolts of true allele here because frankly, I just don't think I'd do a very good job. But you are going to hear from Ashley Hinkle. Ms. Hinkle is a forensic biologist at the GBI Crime Lab who is an expert in true allele. She'll give you a good explanation of what it is and how it works. And ultimately, you're going to hear that all 3 swabs from the sexual assault examination of Ms. Baker were analyzed using true allele. Again, that same swab 2I, this is oral swab B. Again, the second fraction, separating male from female DNA. At least 2 individuals, we'll explain more later. Again, the major contributor based on the true allele results was Edrick Faust. The way true allele reports, ladies and gentlemen, is that the wording is significant. It's called a likelihood ratio. What Ms. Hinkle, I expect, is going to tell you that the likelihood of a match between Mr. Faust and the partial major profile in 2I is 30 octillion times more probable than a coincidental match to an unrelated person in the population. 30 octillion. Again, if I counted right, that is a 3 followed by 28 zeros. So 2J is another swab that was collected at the sexual assault kit from Dr. Falzon way back in 2001. We're going to explain more about what 2J is throughout the trial. First fraction, again, Tara, always Tara. The second fraction of 2J had the profile of at least 3 individuals. There's a match to Chris Melton. Make sure I get it right. 30 octillion times more probable than a coincidental match. And there's also a match to Edrick Faust. Likelihood ratio there.
Your Honor, I will renew my request, my objection.
Your motion is denied.
Yes, ma'am.
You may continue.
The match to Mr. Faust here is 70 billion times more probable than a coincidental match. Then also, ladies and gentlemen, you'll hear about Trulio's analysis of the rectal swabs. Here, the second fraction had at least 3 individuals. There's a match to Chris Melton, a much lower number, 60,000 times more probable than a coincidental match. Going back, ladies and gentlemen, to 2J, the last one that I mentioned, it's a very important fact that I almost overlooked. Why would Chris's DNA be present in 2J? Well, I expect the evidence is going to show you that he and Tara had been intimate the weekend prior to her death. I expect that you'll hear that it is not uncommon for DNA to be found that far in the past, or when sex was known to have happened that far in the past. I expect you're going to hear that current guidelines for collection of evidence in cases like this is 120 hours. So that's 5 days. And again, Chris and Tara had been intimate the weekend before her death. So the rectal swabs, I don't want to spend too much time on it. Obviously, only Chris's DNA is found there. It's a very small amount. That's significant. You'll hear more about that later. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence is going to be very clear that Chris and Tara were not engaging in anal sex. You're going to hear about a phenomenon known in the forensic community known as drainage. I guess an easier way to think about that is gravity. This is a known fact. Semen, just like any other physical object, is subject to gravity. And the vagina and the anus are in pretty close proximity. And remember how Tara's found in the floor of her bedroom. All right, so I'm nearing the end of our story. Armed with their investigation to this point, Agents Bigham and Howell interviewed the defendant. That took place on May the 9th of 2024, and it happened at the Athens-Clarke County Police Department. Mr. Faust had been placed under arrest for the murder of Tara. He was read his rights, and he agreed to talk with him. Now, I'm not going to go into everything that was said over the course of that interview. You're going to see and hear the relevant portions of that interview. But just a note, Mr. Faust said that he'd been living at 350 Cooper Road off and on for 40 years, to include the time frame back in 2001. 350 Cooper Road was actually his stepmother's house. During the interview, Mr. Faust denies ever dating anyone in Deer Park, ever knowing anyone in Deer Park, or that anyone from Deer Park ever came over to his house. All that was said in this interview before he was actually told what the charges were for. And you're going to see, frankly, during this interview, the evidence is going to show that this is pretty conversational nature between the defendant and Agents Bigham and Howell. And then at the end, they tell him what the charges were for. Agent Howell actually says, and he's referring to Tara here, "Don't you remember? It's kind of a big deal." Agent Howell offers, "If you can help us understand why your DNA is in that house, help us. I'm here to exonerate just as much as I am to hunt." And you'll hear the defendant's reaction. Ladies and gentlemen, at the beginning of my opening remarks, I talked about how this trial represents the final chapter in a long, sad saga for both the Baker family and for the Athens community. For decades, everyone who loved Tara wanted to know, who killed Tara Baker? Ladies and gentlemen, Edrick Faust killed Tara Baker. Edrick Faust sexually assaulted Tara Baker. Edrick Faust set her house on fire. And now, the final chapter begins today. But the last few pages of this story haven't been written. At the end of the trial, we're going to hand you the pen, and you, the jury, will write those last few pages. And when you do, you'll have the evidence to write the correct ending to this horrible saga. Ladies and gentlemen, I didn't say the happy ending. That's not possible. The correct one. You'll have everything you need to know to write the ending that the facts support and that justice demands. An ending that finds, beyond a reasonable doubt, the defendant, Edrick Faust, is guilty as charged. Thank you.
Counsel for the defense, opening statement.